right, what up, nerds? Jerod Santo here with changelog.com. Hey, just the other day, I thought to myself, why are we not using GitHub Actions on our Phoenix app? So I went around and started poking through Actions. I'd played with them when they first came out. In fact, we did an episode, gosh, it has to have been a year and a half ago now, called GitHub Actions is the next big thing with Ryan Daigle. Right when Actions first shipped, this is pre-CI days when everybody was wondering, why doesn't it do CI? And played with it then, haven't really integrated it in a production workflow, but a lot of people have. So I thought it's time to get on the GitHub Actions train. I started poking around and I started finding Jonathan Clem's name everywhere I went, especially around the Elixir focused actions. I thought, let's get at least mix test and at least mix format running on our Phoenix app. And then I got all confused and I saw Jonathan's stuff and I thought, you know what? Jonathan Clem with the GitHub Actions team definitely knows his stuff in this regard, and I don't know what I'm doing. So instead of doing all that, let's get Jonathan and have him walk me through it here on a video so we can all learn along. So Jonathan, first of all, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, this should be fun, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And I will point out that in addition to Jonathan's Actions work, he also is taking advantage of the brand new README feature. If you want to learn more about Jonathan, you can find him at github.com/jclem, wherein he lays out some stuff about him. We may do more on READMEs here coming soon, but today it's all about actions. And Jonathan, I'm in your hands here. We want to do a mix test, a mix format. I'll show you the exact workflow that I found.
Cool.
And that was this one. I'm not sure if that's one we'll end up using today, if we're going to do something custom, but we just want to get very basic action support. Yeah, that's what I came across, and I started reading through it. How do I, conceptually everything's cool, but then it's like, how do I actually get this up and running and doing what I want it to do?
Yeah.
And that's when I stopped and said, I'm going to just ask the guy who knows way more than me. So
I think
here's our repo.
Cool. Yeah, I think for what we want to do for changelog, rather than relying on that mix action, especially since you have a custom runtime container that you're running these tests inside of, we can just start a whole new workflow, and I'll just walk you through. We can kind of walk through the steps that you're going to want to do in order to get the setup and everything running. Oh yeah, this is really old. So this is Actions. I forgot about this repo, actually. This is from the old syntax before we switched over to YAML.
That's funny because some of the stuff that got me stopping was looking at this usage and then looking at, I think, the current Elixir setup action.
Yeah.
And it was different. And then I was just kind of like, I have a cognitive dissonance here that I couldn't quite get over.
Yeah.
And I'm lazy, so I just stopped right there. So this will probably be helpful for a lot of people who maybe have gotten to a similar place where it's like, this would be cool, but you get a little bit of friction. It's like, I got other stuff to do.
Yeah, I should go. I should archive this repo. I kind of forgot it was there.
There we go. Well, we both learned something today. Okay, so here's the changelogs repo. As I said, those are the uninitiated. This is the source code that is behind changelog.com, and it is an Elixir app. Very vanilla Elixir and Phoenix application.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to see it in production, I'm not sure why it's loading so slow. I'm going to blame my internet connection because the site's pretty fast. Elixir is very fast.
There it goes.
Speaking of Elixir, we just had Jose Valim on the show here recently.
Oh, I got to listen to that.
So here's the source code. Yeah, it was very fascinating. And here is the site that it drives. And as you mentioned, Jonathan, we do have a Docker-based deployment strategy. So there's a runtime container. There's some stuff going on here. And we want to be able to run some mix stuff inside of Actions. So walk me through it. Where do we start?
So the first thing that you want to do is, do you want to build this inside of the web UI, or would you rather open up an editor and build the workflow in there? It's up to you, really. You get a little bit of like sort of IntelliSense-ish stuff in the web UI, or you can just use your local editor. It's up to you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm kind of a local editor guy. That being said, where do most people author these workflows? Are they?
I like to I use VS Code. I just write them all in there.
Yeah, they're just writing. It's just all YAML files, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's VS Code here. I have a .github directory. In fact, I have this old action.
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't read
Which,
through
did
it,
you
but it
see
looked
that?
like. Uh-huh.
Yeah, basically it's running some sort of image compression on pull requests.
Cool.
This was, again, I think I was setting this up when it was, I was just toying with actions. I'm not even sure if this thing executes or runs. It's just there, so we can probably ignore it. But
okay.
I know that all of this stuff goes inside of the workflows directory inside the .github folder, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to want to create a new YAML file in that .github/workflows directory, and that's where we'll write our workflow. You can just call it whatever you want, test.yaml or ci.yaml or.
All right, test.yaml. All right, here we go.
Cool. So generally, the first thing that you want to decide when you're writing a workflow is, assuming you know what you want it to do. So let's say we're going to start with running mixed test, and then we'll add format after that. Although I think that'll be pretty simple. You want to decide what events you want to trigger the workflow, and so in the actions documentation is a big list of all the events that can trigger workflows. You can run workflows on push or pull request. You can run them via 2 different APIs. You can manually run them from the UI. There's a whole bunch of, I should have had these links ready, but I didn't. Let me see if I can get it to you.
Here we got docs.github.com/action.
Yeah, there's a specific page called events that trigger workflows.
Events that trigger workflows. I'm on it.
Oh, sorry, there's a little lag in the sharing for some reason.
Fair enough.
There
it's
also
yeah,
so events that trigger workflows. This will tell you about all the different webhook events that you can use to trigger workflows.
Okay.
So for this particular one, it sounds like for mixed test, you probably want to run every time there's a push to the default branch and probably on pull request, I would say. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds fair to me. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and add that event configuration back to the in the workflow file then. Do you want me to walk through the syntax with you, or are you already somewhat familiar with it?
Well, I'm looking at this one. Is this up to date, or is this old?
Yeah, that's the key for on is right, but we'll make a couple of changes so that it can support multiple, so that we can configure the events a little bit more. So you'll want that on key that you have in test.yaml. And the value, instead of a string, is going to be an object.
Okay.
And the keys of that object are going to be, in this case, the events.
You specify an object in YAML.
You just enter a new line and then indent by 2 spaces or whatever the indentation is. Yeah. No dash, so that'll be a list. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then just do push colon, and that'll be the first key in the object.
Okay.
And then let's
call this.
We can go ahead and give it a name.
Okay.
So there's a lot of configuration for all of these events. You could actually just leave an empty value here for on push, and it would run for every single push to every single ref in the repo, which is probably a little wasteful.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can do instead is, what's the default branch name, or your sort of like main branch name for this that you merge
it's
BRs
called master.
Into? Okay, cool.
Yep.
So the value of that push key, you want to start a new object. You want to create another new line and then indent it.
Yep.
And the key is going to be branches colon. Now this is just like a convenience. This accepts either a string or a list of strings. So you don't have to have a list. You can just write the word master there, and it'll know to only run when there's pushes to master. And then this is another little YAML space saving tip. If you want, you can actually put branches master after the word push on line 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then wrap it in curly brackets, basically kind of like a weird JSON object-y looking thing, or JavaScript plain object. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's actually functionally equivalent of having it on its own indented line.
Yeah, and you can do the same thing with arrays in YAML too. You could wrap it in square brackets if you wanted a list of a single object. Actually, that would work. So now we want to do the same for pull request.
So pull?
Yeah, underscore request.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then same branches.
Exactly.
Okay.
One thing to note is that by default, pull requests, this didn't used to be the case, but now we have a default filter for pull requests where it'll only run on. So in the GitHub ecosystem, events have different sort of like types. So pull request has like opened, assigned, edited. You can see the list there. By default, it's only going to run on open, synchronized, or reopened. And so synchronized is basically when the submitter pushes to the pull request branch.
Okay.
So by default, you're going to have sort of the most sensible configuration there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's like the most typical things that happen, right?
Yeah. If you wanted to change that, I'd have to look it up, but I think the configuration key is types. You would add to that same object where branches is, and you could specify your own list of activity types.
Gotcha. In the case of running your tests, you don't want to run your tests when somebody assigns a label to the pull request or when somebody
exactly
unassigns a person. So that makes a lot of sense. I can see where some actions would want those things, but without that, the sensible defaults. Where do you learn what those three are? Is it here? Let's see. Oh, yeah.
It's in that note there.
Open, synchronized, and reopened. There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. So the last thing that's kind of convenient to add to this event configuration here, there's a new event type called workflow dispatch. And if you add that, it'll allow you to manually trigger this from the user interface.
Oh, so you can test it as you create it, huh?
Yeah, that's a really useful one. Okay. And by default, it'll just run on the triggering it from the UI. It'll run on, I think, the default branch.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you leave that just
you can just leave that empty,
afterwards?
and it gets parsed as like nil. But since the key's there, we treat it as configured. So that's it for the event configuration. So this will run anytime there's a push to master, anytime pull requests on master, or on workflow dispatch.
Okay. What's next?
So now we're kind of get into the meat of the workflow, and I think we can do this all. So basically, just some terminology for actions, maybe useful real quick. So this overall thing is called a workflow. Workflows can have multiple jobs inside of them, and each of those jobs runs inside of an isolated virtual machine. And then each job can have a list of steps that runs in order. And the steps are basically just like executing sequential processes in shells, one after the other, on the same VM. Yeah.
Okay.
So for the job configuration, the key is just called jobs, and that's going to be an object of all of that describes all the jobs in this workflow.
Okay. Where do we find the jobs information in the
So
docs?
if you go into the actions reference, and then let me see if I can find exactly what the
workflow commands, maybe?
I think it's in workflow syntax. The first one there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Commands is a little different. We actually won't need commands for this, but there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with them.
What kind of stuff does commands provide you?
Commands lets you do things like set custom exit codes. It lets you set, if you have let's say you have a step that you want it to sort of output a value and you want another step to read that value. The first step would use commands to basically set its step output so that the other command could read it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So but there's a bunch of them.
Docs here.
Yeah, these are this is the syntax for jobs. So it's an object, and then the keys of that object are basically just unique IDs for each individual job in the workflow.
Okay, so is this where we specify that we want to run mix test, or we're starting to get to that point?
Yeah, so we're going to call this, there's a fair amount of setup we're going to do for this first before we get there. So this, let's just call this test : that'll be the unique ID for the job.
Okay.
And the value is also an object. So the sort of the most important key here is runs-on. And that basically tells actions what virtual machine you want to run this job on. We're going to run in Docker, but we still need some virtual machine, of course, to run that's going to run the Docker container for us. So you can probably just do Ubuntu-latest for this, and this will run on the latest release we have available of Ubuntu.
Now, are these specifically GitHub Actions images or these Docker containers?
These are action-specific virtual machines that we maintain.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, not containers per se. So by default, your job runs in a Ubuntu, Windows, or Mac OS virtual machine, and then you can optionally run Docker containers in there, or you can just run your workflow directly in the VM. Yeah.
Gotcha. So containers optional. You're going to be inside of a GitHub run virtual machine, and you inside of that you can run a Docker container or any sort
they
of
all
other
have
container
Docker.
if you'd like to. Very good.
Yeah, exactly. Or Mac and Linux have Docker. I don't remember whether we have it yet on Windows. You can also run self-hosted runners if you want, so you don't have to use hosted runners. Like you can even register I've run actions on my MacBook Pro before. It's pretty easy. In the repository settings, you can register a self-hosted runner. It's pretty cool.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
So does that just run on, you have to run that from localhost then, or is it run on it runs on GitHub, but it connects to your MacBook?
Yeah, so basically the settings gives you a little command line script that you paste, and that machine will register itself. There's like a token that it uses to register itself as a runner. So you can do it from basically any virtual machine that can communicate with the GitHub.com API. Any host, any computer. Sorry.
Why would you want to do that on your MacBook, by the way? Or you're testing something?
Yeah, for testing you can do it. It's not usually done on your MacBook, but some people have like a fleet of self-hosted runners because they have if you don't want to reinstall a specific large binary that you would have to recompile or cache in GitHub Actions, if you have it pre-installed on your self-hosted runners, it would just be there for you every time you ran a workflow.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is, so there is one backing service that you need to run your tests. Am I right? You run Postgres 9.5?
Correct.
Cool. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a section to this job called services, and that's how we're going to define the backing services that Actions is going to start up for us before it runs the rest of the workflow. Yeah.
Okay.
And services is an object, and basically these are all going to be containers. So services are always containers that get run, and you'll probably want to call the key just Postgres. And that's the host name that's going to be in the Docker container network as well. So we'll need that later.
Okay.
So the first thing that we want to do here, basically, this is going to be pretty similar to your other workflow that runs Postgres. We want to first add a key called image, and we want to tell it what specific Postgres image you run, which I think is just 9.5, if I remember. It's poking around a little bit in there.
In our Docker file?
Yeah. Or it's in your other, I don't know if it's in your, I was looking in your other CI file, the CD workflow that you have. Yeah. I think it was 9.5.
Circle that. Or here it is, circle CI config. Postgres. So 9.5. Do I just literally just specify 9.5 here?
Yeah, so
under image,
you can just do Postgres colon 9.5 and it'll pull it from Docker Hub.
Am I doing it in the right place?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in the wrong place. I am.
Yeah. There's actually specific, that's right. And then the next key is going to be env colon. We're going to add some environment variables.
Okay.
There's also documentation specifically for running Postgres containers because it's so common as services. Let me see where the link to it is. I think that's under in Redis as well. There's like a specific guide. So it's called Creating Postgres Containers. I can Zoom chat you the link if that's faster. It's up to you. It's under the GitHub Actions / workflows.
Service here.
If you open up oh yeah, there you go. That'll show up. That should find it.
Right there.
Yeah.
First hit?
Yep, that's it.
Cool.
But this is basically describing exactly what we're going to be doing now. It's just setting up a backing service that's going to run.
Okay.
So we want some environment variables first to configure this. And I already looked a little bit through your configuration in your Phoenix test config. So you want to set the Postgres _ user. Yeah, that's exactly. You just want to copy that over.
Sweet. And here, that's right.
Yeah. And then in order to wait for the service, in the other workflow, you were using a shell script to wait, but we can actually use a Docker health check in order to wait for Postgres to be up. We can actually wait for Postgres to tell us that it's ready. And it's a little bit more accurate. So the next key after env is if you do options. And then this is another weird YAML trick. So do a space and then a greater than and then a dash.
Greater than dash.
Yeah. And then
what's this mean?
Basically that's going to say that the starting on the new line after that dash, any of the indented text with new lines, it's going to basically concatenate them into a single line. So it lets you split up a bunch of command line arguments on new lines without having to put like backslashes between them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look inside of that if you can go back to that creating Postgres service containers document, I believe it has the health check in there for you already.
Right here?
Yeah, there it is. So those 4 lines there.
Sweet. Okay. Looks good.
Yep, and PG is ready is a binary that comes with Postgres. It's in the container, and so this is exactly what it's for.
Oh, nice. Learned something new today. Did not know this existed.
Yeah. I don't think we need to expose the port since you're running your container in Docker, so we'll add that if we have to, but I think you should be fine. You can specify ports that you want to expose to the virtual machine, but I don't think that we need to do that here. So that's it for the Postgres service. So the next key that we want to add after services, you may have to do some.
I think I got it.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I think I got it.
Container. That looks right.
Container. Yeah, that looks good.
So you can run some steps in the virtual machine and some steps in containers if you want. For this particular workflow, I think it makes sense just to run the entire job in a container. And so if we specify the container here at the job level, it basically tells Actions to run every step inside of the container that we're going to specify, that it's going to pull from Docker Hub.
Okay.
So this is going to be an object, and the first key is going to be image. And the value, you're going to want your the changelog runtime container.
Yeah. Dot runtime.
I have it here. I can paste it to you or something if you want. It's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead and paste it to me. Cool. I don't have it. Well, I pasted it to you.
There. That's the value. Oh, I think it's also in the other CI, in the Circle CI config too.
Yeah, I know it was somewhere in our repo, but I just don't remember where. All right, image, boom. And
then we're going to add another key. We want to specify some environment variables for this. So if you add another env key under image,
inside of image.
Oh no, sorry, inside of container after image. My bad.
Under 9. Okay.
Yeah.
Also worth pointing. So the changelog / runtime. This is a Docker container that has all of our stuff, FFmpeg, Elixir installed, all the things that we need to run our production application.
Yep.
And our tests and everything else. So just for the viewer's sake, that's what that runtime is. It's an image created by us and maintained by us, which builds on top of the Circle CI Elixir container. Okay, keep going.
Exactly. So we're going to go ahead. This is where we can specify our mixEnv variable for every single step. So env is also going to be an object, and you'll want to add your mix _ env test. And then there's going to be another one, so you'll probably want to do it on a new line. Yeah.
Test.
Yeah. And then the next one I discovered by poking around a little bit. In the changelogs test configuration, for the database connection, it accepts either a database URL environment variable, or it tries to connect to localhost. So in our case, I think it makes sense to add a db_URL environment variable here. And then we can just give it the URL to connect to the Docker to the Postgres service that's running inside of the Docker network. This is actually a little more complicated because we're doing everything inside of Docker, so there's a little bit of Docker networking knowledge we need to have.
Okay.
So if you go into the config test.exs file, we're going to pull out the exact same string that's in there, just with one little change.
So that's this one right here.
Yeah.
Do we use the full ecto deal, or just?
Yeah, you can just yank that whole value out.
Okay.
And the only thing we want to change is change localhost to Postgres. Since we're running everything inside of Docker, the Postgres service will be at the Postgres
right
host
here,
name.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
If this changed, this would have to change.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So that's our container setup. And so now we can get to the actual stuff.
I'm really glad I asked you to help me. I would have never gotten this done.
Yeah. When you have like backing services and stuff like that, there's a little bit more setup you need, but luckily the docs for Actions have improved a lot. So it's like there was documentation for this Postgres setup and everything. It's just a matter of finding it, which is not always easy.
And then gluing it all together, because we have Postgres setup, we have container setup, then we have like the talking between the two.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely would have taken me some learning. I would have learned, but not quite as quickly. So
yeah, I should write a post or something specifically for like running your Phoenix CI. That's a good idea. Cool. So the next job key after container is going to be steps.
Steps. Now we get to the actual fun part, right? Like, what do you want to do?
Yeah. So this is a list. You're going to want a new line and then a dash.
So a dash indicates an entry in a list.
Yeah, exactly.
Just indented is just a key value. Okay.
And every value in steps, every entry in that list is an object describing the step. There's a bunch of different ways you can run. You can specify how steps run. You can just give them a key called run and give it a shell command to execute. Or you can give it a key called uses, and that's basically there's a special format for specifying an action that you want to use.
Okay.
Yep. So uses is what we're going to want to do. So the first thing, most of the time that you want to run in a workflow is you want to get your source code. So by default, we don't even check out your source code because there are lots of different workflows that users run that they don't even need access to the source code to run the workflow.
Really? Like, can you give me a for instance? Like, I think you'd always want the source code.
Yeah, so not necessarily. So like, let's say that when you get a pull request in your repo, you want to apply a label to it based on the paths that are changed in that pull request. So all the information about paths that are changed in a pull request are in the webhook payload. So you can actually look at those paths that were changed and then apply the appropriate label without ever needing to check out the actual source code.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is the action is called actions/checkout. And this format is basically the repository owner / repository name, and then a version specifier, which we're going to do at v2.
Just like that?
Yeah. So this could also be at main, which I think is the default branch now for this action. I don't know if it's been switched. Or it could be a git SHA. You could just an actual commit SHA, and we would use that.
Uses, this is a sub workflow, like it's using another What is action/checkout?
It's using an action.
That's an action.
Yeah. So the terminology here, yeah. Action/checkout is an action. Basically, an action is like a unit of work that gets done inside of a job that's sort of built by somebody else.
So this is where it becomes modular. Yeah. I can use somebody else's action, and I can put those together and create a workflow. But can you use somebody else's entire workflow? No, you just copy it into your repo. Like, okay.
Yeah, right now you just copy it into your repo, but I think there are definitely some related improvements there on the roadmap. Cool. One quick note, I should probably always take the opportunity to discourage people from using master or main unless they absolutely have to, because it means that you'll break your workflow easily if someone commits a breaking change to this. There's no lock file or anything like this like you have for program dependencies. So if you use the default branch, you're always going to get the latest commit there when you run this action. Gotcha. And so it's generally best to specify at least a commit SHA, but the versions are kind of nice.
Are these just using Git tags, the versions, or are these some other feature?
Yeah, those are Git tags. Yeah. So if you ever want to learn about an action you see in a workflow, action/checkout means just github.com/actions/checkout, and that's where all the documentation will be for.
Cool.
It.
All right, let's see what we're talking about here. So this is a singular action, probably one of the most used actions in the whole world, which is the checkout.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the most used one.
And so here you can see V2. That's the latest release, and I'm sure all actions have their own varying level of good or not so good documentation. Of course, GitHubs are probably great. And there you go. So we're using that, and then we build upon that, right? Or we...
Yeah, so I think the default behavior is fine. I don't think we need any special options here. The checkout action is pretty smart. So it looks at the webhook payload, and it looks at the commit ref for that event, and will check out that commit for us automatically. Even for pull requests, it's pretty smart. So what you wouldn't want is on a pull request, you don't want it to check out just the ref that was pushed to the PR branch. There's something called a merge commit that's created, and we actually check out that merge commit. That takes a little bit more time to resolve.
Cool. So here you can see a bunch of things that you could configure, but it's smart enough to just know for most cases, you just want to pull your own repositories, most recent ref and stuff like that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Personally, I don't think I've ever provided configuration to Actions checkout, but there are definitely use cases that other people have. Most of the time, you won't need it.
Sweet.
So that's the first one. I'm going to skip all of the caching stuff for now, and we'll add caching after we've just got the basic stuff down. Cool. So the second step is going to be, this is something that when I was sort of tinkering with this earlier, something is odd with the mix home variable, and so I've been having to manually install rebar and hex. I'm not sure why yet, but let's just go ahead and do that now so we don't run into the bug. So this is a run, and you're going to want to do the mix do local rebar force and local hex force. Yeah.
-- force.
I've got to look into why this is happening. I'm not sure yet.
Correct my syntax if it's not 100%.
That looks right. Yeah.
Then what?
Cool. So the next step that we're going to want to do is we're going to fetch your mix dependencies.
So we do another run and a mix deps.get, I assume.
Yep.
Okay, now we're in the world where I'm starting to understand a few things.
Yeah.
And
we could probably just go ahead and compile the deps here. I guess they'll auto-compile when we run tests, but I like to compile them ahead of time. I don't know why.
Deps compile or just mix compile?
No, that's it. Yeah, you could do compile too, probably.
That would compile your entire app, not just your dependencies.
Yeah.
Which will happen when you run mix test if they're not compiled yet. So.
And then you have yarn assets that you're going to want to install too.
Is it yarn install, I think? Or is it, we have to go into the assets directory maybe?
Yeah, I think you need to do a cd and.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there may be an option for run for a working directory, but I don't remember what it is. But it would be in the documentation for the workflow syntax. I always just do an and because it's easier to remember. Oh, you have a frozen -lock file argument on your yarn install. I don't use yarn, so I don't really remember what that does, but you may want to add the frozen lock file argument there, just because I saw it in the other workflow.
Jerod must have done that. I'm not sure what it's for. Like that? Oh, I spelled it lock.
Frozen -lock file.
-lock file. Yeah, I'm not sure what that one is.
My guess is that it's similar to doing npm CI, maybe, but I don't know. And then run your tests.
Do we need to set mixenv to test, or is that assumed?
That is specified in our entire container environment configuration. Yeah. And I think
we got it.
This will get us going. Yeah, you can probably go ahead and add the format check if you want to do that.
You just run it next, mix format?
Yep, just run it in another run. This one's a little complicated, so it's not going to obviously write the formatting and then commit it back to the PR. Right. There are definitely ways to do that. I think there's a flag where you just where it just checks them and then sets a appropriate exit code.
So it's going to task specific option. Check formatted, maybe? Checks that the file's already formatted?
Yeah, check formatted. I think that's what you want.
And so that's just going to exit with success or failure, depending on if you're matching the intended format?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you wanted to actually format code for the PR, I think the problem you run into is that you end up with interleaved user commits, then your workflow runs and commits some formatting, and then the user has to rebase before they can push again.
Right.
Which can get a little frustrating. What you could do instead is you could write if I wanted to actually apply formatting, I would probably you could write a workflow on workflow dispatch where you specify a PR number. And so you would say, I want to format this PR now before I merge it or something like that.
Okay.
So you just do it manually. It's probably a way to do it automatically, but I'd have to
what if we just wanted to comment, what if we wanted to run this only on PRs and we wanted to submit some sort of a response back to the opener that says, hey, you failed mix format or something like that? Would that be massively complicated?
It depends on a couple of different circumstances. If it is coming from a fork, it's a little bit complicated. So for hand wavy security reasons, when there's a pull request coming from a fork on an open source repository, we don't provide that workflow with write tokens because a malicious person could fork your repository and then exfiltrate all of your other secrets because they have access to, they're able to change the workflow in that pull request.
Okay.
Because the pull request that gets run or the workflow that gets run is going to be from the result of the merge commit on that pull request. It's going to
run on the first party repo and have access to those things, but from a fork. Gotcha. Yeah. So that makes some sense. But if it was just a collaborator directly on the repo,
you could do the comment. Yeah.
Would it be another step? Would it be a completely another service? Where would that? We don't have to do it today.
It would be another step. Yeah, you would just do you could either write your own. There are definitely some actions for it. So in the ecosystem, there's definitely some comment on PR actions already out there, and you just provide it with a message and your GitHub token, which they can probably get automatically now.
Let's see. Just doing I'm feeling lucky here and see if we get anything.
Yeah.
Run a GitHub action on.
It may be a little more complicated because we're running everything in a container.
So here's a
but there are various ways to work
comment
around
trigger.
it.
I'm not sure if this is an action or some other thing. Looks like it's an action. So yeah, there are.
Yeah.
You would use some other action and then send it some sort of a response based. You have to base it on the actual return value of this or something like that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And if in the documentation, it explains ways that you would get the um, whether or not that step failed. So like right now, this if that format check fails, the whole workflow will
Mm-hmm.
fail. But you could tell that step not to fail the whole workflow if it fails, and then you would continue on to the comment step. There's a few ways of doing that.
Okay. Yeah. Then how do you get
Yeah.
out? You have to get back both the error or the return value from the command as well as the standard output, right? To capture. I assume, well, you wouldn't have to, but like it would be nice to say, hey, you failed mixed format. Here's what mixed format said. Blah. You know.
I don't know if we have annotations working for mixed format. I'd have to look, but there is a thing called annotations. This may work better if someone wrote an action
Yeah.
for it. Um, but basically, you can register annotations where it'll parse the output of a command that's run, and then it'll add annotations to the pull request code in line saying like this is
Oh, that would be
misformatted, for
super cool.
example. Yeah.
All right, so let's call this for today. Let's keep the scope nice and neat, and let's call
Yeah.
this where we're trying to get. Now, I just basically commit and push this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So add a test GitHub action workflow, and for some reason my log file got updated. We'll ignore that. So that's just the whole file there. Commit that. And push her up. Looks like that's going. So come back to here.
Oh, you're going right to master.
Yeah, man. That's how I roll. 19 seconds ago. So where would we see this doing its thing?
It's if you go to the repo and click on the Actions tab, it should show up there, although I don't see it quite yet.
All in good time.
Oh, sorry.
Turn it on.
We have the file in .github. It needs to be in .github/workflows.
Oh, I put it in the wrong place. Like a fool. Where did
I do that in VS Code all the time.
I thought it was. I
Easy to
clicked
put
on the
them one
workflows
directory
folder
out.
and said new file.
I
Of
thought so
course, what
too.
I did.
I'm gonna blame
Yeah,
VS
so
Code.
am I. Totally
Yeah,
not my fault. Okay, move.github / test to .github workflows test. I'm not gonna trust VS Code this time. Okay,
There
now
we
it's
go.
in there. Now I get to do the mea culpa here. Put the workflow in the right place. Okay. That should be moved. It's gone. Actions. Ooh, put the workflow in the right place.
Cool.
So that's
There it
running.
is.
Is that what that yellow means? Oh, now it's running.
Yeah. Before when it doesn't have that little halo around it, it means it's queued, and then once it has that spinning sort of halo thing.
So what kind of transparency do we get into what's going on? We can look at the workflow file from here.
Yeah, so that'll show you the workflow that basically that it's running, and then if you click on the left-hand side there, it'll basically that'll be a list of the jobs that are in the workflow, and we just have one. So if you click on test, you'll have a live tail of the running workflow.
Sweet.
It is sometimes it takes a little bit to get the log streaming in, but I've got it over here. I don't know why it hasn't opened there yet.
We'll just fast forward this part in the video. We'll do one of those.
Yeah.
And then it's done.
Oh, while we wait, there's another cool repo I can show you that is useful for scripting stuff like PR comments. So if you go to github.com/actions/github-script.
GitHub script. Hey, there you are.
So yeah, so basically this action allows you to execute an asynchronous JavaScript function, but inside of that execution context, it automatically gives you access to a pre-authenticated GitHub client, an OctoKit object, which is basically like a REST client for the GitHub API. So if you're familiar with like the GitHub API and OctoKit at all, you can really easily do things like write a script that comments on an issue or comments on a pull request just by writing like a short little JavaScript script inside of your actual workflow.
It is right here. So this is on an opened issue, on issues opened. It will run on Ubuntu latest, and the steps are, of course, you have to use GitHub script, and then you get the token of the current, I guess, the authenticated user. And then the script is basically, this is just like a OctoKit
so that's the,
REST post, right?
Yeah.
You're like just posting that create comment object. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, so it allows you to like write scripts that use the GitHub API without having to like, actually have any of those dependencies in your repository.
And a good example of when you actually don't care about the code. This is like, hey, thanks. Like you're basically just saying auto.
Oh yeah, it's meant as like a real quick, just need to do something simple like add a label or something like that. I wouldn't use it to deploy your production code or anything like that. Oh, your tests are running. If you want to go back to the workflow,
now we gotta find out if it fails because my tests are bad. They were passing earlier today, so if they don't pass,
we're good.
To blame. Oh, look at that. Well, failing mixed format is probably because it failed. Let's see here.
That was default test.
So that's weird. So if I run mixed format right here, it might actually change it. Hopefully it's the same situation. Weird. It doesn't change anything. What if I run -- check formatted? There's a discrepancy between some sort of setting, like mixed format settings in the container versus on my machine or something.
Maybe it's a version. It could be a
version, or even
maybe it's an Elixir.
Right? Is there like difference? a dot mixed format thing? I don't remember setting anything. That appears to have.
I don't know what it is. It's not wanting to change anything when I do it locally either.
Okay. Well, I assume it's a version thing.
Yeah.
I don't have any specific like mix,
Do you know what Elixir version is in that container?
It's like 1.8.
Looks like something. Oh, it's 1.8.
That might be the problem. I know we're on 1.9 locally.
That could be it. I don't know if I have.
Oh, that's what we've done.
I think that might be it. Yeah, I have some problems locally when I use Elixir 1.8 instead of the current version. Yeah. So there must have been some formatting changes.
So our runtime Docker file starts with circleci Elixir 1.8. And we're running 1.9 here, so that's probably likely. It makes sense that they would update their mixed format rules between major, I guess that's minor versions of Elixir. So we could either just disable that and watch it be successful, or we could just assume that having resolved that, it would work. What does it look like?
We can go back and we can tell it not to fail on that step if you just want to see how another step configuration, a little bit more step configuration works. So in our mixed format -- check formatted.
Yep.
If you, under run, add another key that's just continue on error with dashes between continue -on -error. and then just set it to true.
Just like that.
Yep. And then that'll just make it so that if that step fails, the workflow will continue, or in this case, it'll just stop and say that it succeeded.
Maybe a cool step for this last one would be to do that inside of the visual editor, just to show folks that. Is it going to be substantially different than what we see inside the YAML file if I click on Actions to edit the workflow as is?
We don't have the visual editor.
Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
So when you asked if I want to do it on GitHub or in my, you just mean like in the regular GitHub text edit?
In the text editor, yeah. We have, for workflows specifically, we have some like autocomplete stuff. Like the editor understands the workflow.
That's how long I've been away from Actions, because when I did the show with Ryan, like the visual editor, which is, we won't talk about it, but it was this really cool kind of WYSIWYG, kind of a visual drag and droppy thing. I thought that's what you were referring to when you mentioned that. So that's been...
no, that made me a little sad. It was one of the first things I worked on at GitHub.
Yeah, why didn't it make the cut? Was it just hard for folks to wield?
I'm not sure exactly. I think that it wasn't used. To my surprise, because I liked it, I think it just wasn't used nearly as much as people were just writing.
They just weren't using it.
Just HCL inside of their text editor, yeah.
Makes sense. I think
I wouldn't mind seeing it make a comeback.
I think it's great for getting started. I think eventually everybody would pretty much graduate out of it. But I did think it was neato when I first played with it. So
yeah, it was at least a cool visualization for sure too when the workflows were running.
Well, I committed that and pushed it up now, so it's going to be running again. And we don't have, I guess we could have added some of that caching stuff if we wanted to, but...
Yeah, I can show you how to run this manually too. So if you click on test, or actually if you go back to the Actions tab, the main one, and it'll show you a list of all of your workflows. So if you click on Mix Test, oh, maybe I misconfigured it. I don't have the dispatch.
I have it right here. This workflow has a workflow dispatch event trigger.
Let me make sure we configured it right. There should be a little button there.
I have the button. Is it the button you're referring to? Run workflow?
Oh, yeah. Why wasn't it? Yeah. Oh, I'm not a maintainer of this repo. Obviously, it's not going to let me dispatch
Come on.
a workflow.
Jonathan, you can't just dispatch my workflows. There it is.
So yeah, as long as you're a maintainer, as long as you're a maintainer of the repo, you'll be able to manually run the workflow. Nice. If you look through the docs for workflow dispatch, you can actually specify inputs that show up as text fields there.
Okay, so you can actually like toggle some stuff and give it different inputs, so you can test your workflow without repeatedly pushing, which is what people probably were doing before this. Well, it's just like tweak a thing, push to a branch, tweak a thing, push to a branch. That was probably the workflow before, so this is nice.
Yeah, it's super useful.
Very cool. So let's see here if our mixed test succeeded. I'd like to see a successful run here before we call it quits. We're ignoring.
We're compiling. Cool.
We are ignoring the check formatted. We're running it, but we're just not going to care if it fails until I get that discrepancy figured out.
That key also exists at the job level, so you can also say, if you have multiple jobs in your workflow, you can tell it to ignore failure of like an entire job.
So we won't do it today, but if you were to point me towards the caching stuff so we could skip some of these steps if they've been done, what would that is? We're in the docs, or where do you point people towards to set up to really streamline and optimize?
I would go straight to the cache repo. So it's github.com/action/cache, and there's even There's an example in that repo somewhere specifically for Elixir, I think. And the Elixir starter workflow now also has not build caching, but it has dependency caching by default. There's like a starter workflow for Elixir projects. So basically the way the caching works is you tell the step or the action what file system path you want to cache, and then you give it a key for the cache key, and then you can give it optionally a list of restore keys where it'll, if it fails to find the key, it'll look for one of the restore keys next and see if there's a partial match. Oh, there you go.
I found it, and then I scrolled away. Here it is. So there's your key for your Elixir mixed depths.
Yeah, that format string is, I think, a little more complicated than it needs to be. You could just pass the string mix.lock to that hash files function. So there's actually a bunch of built-in functions inside of Actions that you can use. One of them is that hash files function that'll it'll hash a file for you. So that's not specific to the cache action. That's like a general thing you have access to in the Actions runtime.
Cool. So would I drop that inside of like after this uses?
You put it at the very top. Yeah, you could put it after checkout. Probably makes the most sense.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then you could do the same thing for your build directory. Generally, it seems like people also just use mix.lock to cache the build directory too, which is probably fine. And for your NPM modules as well.
Sweet.
So you would end up with 3 separate cache steps.
One for mixed depths, one for NPM, and then one for the build.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome, Jonathan. This is great, man. Look, hey, complete job. There it is, green.
There you go.
And does this manifest itself anywhere else in the UI, like on the commit, or?
Yeah, it'll show up as a check suite on the commit itself, and then if this were happening in a pull request, it would show up at the bottom of the pull request and then next to each commit as well.
Here's my check, probably right there.
Yeah. Cool. And then that should have everything that ran for this commit.
There it is.
Does that drop down? There we go.
Separate one that we had set up already. And there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Hey, that's awesome, man. Anything else that we didn't touch on, or that's like a general purpose public service announcements around GitHub Actions, are the best way to get started?
I would say just look over like the basic documentation. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at _Clem, CLEM. And I'm always perfectly willing to help, and other hubbers are always super, super willing to help out as well to figure stuff out. There's also a great GitHub Community website at github.community. There's a specific actions section in there as well.
Cool. I will swipe up all these links. GitHub.community, huh?
Yeah. So that's the GitHub Community support page. Basically, it's a pretty active forums, especially the actions section. There's all sorts of, usually if you have a problem, there's very likely a solution in there somewhere.
What if your problem is your internet's too slow to load web pages? There it is. You can't fix that for me? Come on.
No, unfortunately.
Awesome. There you have it, man. Great. This is a great time for me. I learned a lot. Definitely learned. Cool. Hopefully you learned that you need to get rid of this old action mix. So we start throwing people for a loop, but we're fixing things where
that's on my to-dos.
We are showing people the path towards success with GitHub Actions. Get out there and try it. All the links to all the things will be down in the description. Jonathan, this was awesome. Thanks so much for walking me through setting up GitHub Actions on a repo.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. Thanks for having me. This was great.